The fluorescent lights of JFK's Terminal 4 hummed with a special kind of cruelty, the kind that magnifies every frustration on a sweltering August afternoon. For David Henderson, it wasn't the heat or the cacophony of rolling suitcases that bothered him. It was the cold, dismissive gaze of the man behind the counter. The check-in agent's name tag read Peterson, and he was staring at David's first-class ticket as if it were a poorly forged ball document. "Sir, are you certain you're at the correct counter?" The question was quiet, yet it echoed with the weight of 1,000 assumptions. What Peterson didn't know, what no one in that terminal could possibly comprehend, was that the ticket wasn't the only thing David owned. As of 3 hours ago, he owned the plane, the counter, and Mr. Peterson's salary. And the quiet storm that was about to break would be one for the history books. David Henderson felt the familiar thrum of exhaustion deep in his bones, a feeling he hadn't shaken in 72 hours. It was a weariness born not of physical labor, but of marathon conference calls, armies of lawyers, and the final heart-stopping digital signature that had transferred billions of dollars and shifted the landscape of commercial aviation. He had just concluded the single largest acquisition of his career, a hostile takeover of Global Wings Airlines, a beleaguered giant struggling under the weight of debt and a tarnished public image. Now all he wanted was to get home. He stood in the priority check-in line, a ghost among the sharply dressed business travelers. He wore a simple, charcoal grey, cashmere hoodie, comfortable joggers, and a pair of minimalist leather sneakers. The only hint of his true financial status was the Patek Philippe on his wrist, its face subtle and its complications hidden a quiet nod to precision and value that he appreciated. His travel bag was a well-worn but unmistakably high-quality leather duffel slung casually over his shoulder. He wasn't trying to make a statement. On the contrary, he was trying to be invisible, just another tired traveler heading from New York to Los Angeles. The line shuffled forward. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and anxiety. David watched the agent at the counter. The man whose name tag identified him as Peterson moved with a kind of weary belligerence. He barked at a family for having an overweight bag, sneered at a young couple for being 5 minutes late for the check-in cutoff, and generally radiated an aura of someone who believed his small kingdom of Formica and conveyor belts was the most important place on earth. David had seen 1,000 Petersons in his life. Men who clung to what little power they had, wielding it like a cudgel against anyone they deemed beneath them. It was a look he had first encountered as a child in a corner store in Gary, Indiana, and had since seen in boardrooms, on country club patios, and now at the check-in counter of the airline he now owned. Finally, it was his turn. He placed his duffel on the scale and slid his passport and phone, displaying his digital boarding pass across the counter. "Good afternoon, David," said his voice low and steady. Peterson didn't return the greeting. He picked up the passport, flipping through it with a theatrical slowness. He tapped a few keys on his terminal, his eyes darting from the screen to David's face. The agent's brow was furrowed in a mask of perpetual suspicion. "Henderson," David Peterson muttered more to himself than to David. He then looked at the first-class designation on the boarding pass. A flicker of something disbelief or perhaps disdain crossed his face. He looked at David's hoodie, then back at the screen. "Purpose of your travel to Los Angeles?" Peterson asked. The question was standard, but the tone was not. It was the tone of an interrogator, not a service agent. "Business," David replied simply. "What kind of business?" David paused, a sliver of annoyance cutting through his fatigue. "I have meetings." Peterson leaned forward, slightly lowering his voice into a conspiratorial, condescending register. "Sir, are you certain you're at the correct counter? This is the first class and priority lane for global wings." The implication hung in the air, thick and foul. David felt a familiar cold tightening in his gut, but his face remained a placid mask. He had spent a lifetime learning to control his reactions, to turn anger into fuel and condescension into data. "I believe so," David said, his voice dangerously soft. "The ticket says first class. The sign says first class. Is there a problem?" Peterson smirked, a small, ugly twisting of his lips. "It's just an expensive ticket. We have to be careful with fraudulent bookings. Sometimes people get confused." He tapped more keys, his knuckles white. The clacking sound seemed unnaturally loud in the bubble of tension that had formed around the counter. David was aware of the people in line behind him, their impatience shifting to curiosity. A scene was beginning to brew, and he was, as he had been so many times before, at its center. "There's no confusion on my end," David said, meeting the agent's gaze. "Is there a problem with the ticket, or are you just admiring it?" The sarcasm, subtle as it was, landed. Peterson's face hardened. The pretense of customer service evaporated, replaced by raw, petty authority. "I'm going to need to verify some things," Peterson said, his voice now carrying a note of triumph. "It's standard procedure for security." He drew the last word out, imbuing it with a significance that both men knew was entirely fabricated. He reached for his radio, a clear sign of escalation. The quiet man in the queue was about to become a very public spectacle. The crackle of Peterson's radio sliced through the terminal's ambient noise. "Yeah, Brenda, it's Peterson at 4B. I've got a situation here. A passenger in first. The booking looks irregular. I think you should come down." He placed the radio back on the counter with a decisive click, a clear message to David that he was no longer in whole control of the situation. The line behind David had stalled completely. Murmurs rippled through the queue. Faces filled with a mixture of impatience and rubbernecking curiosity were turned toward them. David felt the familiar heat of a dozen pairs of eyes on his skin. He stood perfectly still, his hands resting calmly on the edge of the counter, a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions brewing within. He had built an empire on logic, on seeing 10 moves ahead. His acquisition of global wings had been a masterpiece of strategy, exploiting market weaknesses and shareholder discontent with surgical precision. The irony was corrosive. He could command boardrooms and bend markets to his will. But in this moment, he was just a black man in a hoodie being profiled by a check-in agent with an authority complex. Peterson avoided David's eyes, busying himself by rearranging papers on his desk. He was enjoying this, David realized. The performance of power was the entire point. What exactly is irregular about the booking? David asked, his voice still low, forcing Peterson to lean in to hear him. Peterson looked up, emboldened by the impending arrival of his supervisor. The ticket was purchased less than 6 hours ago. Full fare, first class, one way. That's a red flag. A red flag for what? Having money and needing to travel. It's a pattern we're trained to look for, Peterson said, puffing out his chest slightly. It's procedure. Show me the procedure. David countered, his voice like ice. Show me the page in your employee manual that says a last-minute premium cabin ticket purchased by a man who looks like me is a red flag. Peterson's face twitched. He was cornered by logic, so he fell back on the shield of all bureaucrats' feigned offense and obfuscation. "Sir, I don't have to justify our security protocols to you. If you'll just step to the side, my supervisor will be here momentarily to explain things." "I'm not stepping to the side. This is the check-in counter. I'm checking in. Or is there a special interrogation room for people who buy tickets you don't think they can afford?" The jab hit its mark. A man in a suit 2 places back in the line sighed loudly. A woman whispered to her companion. The audience was growing restless. This was exactly the kind of scene Global Wing's corporate PR department had nightmares about the very reason their brand was in the toilet. It was a symptom of the deep systemic rot David had paid billions to fix. A few minutes later, a woman with a severe haircut and a tight-lipped expression marched toward them. Her name tag read, "Brenda Wallace, Station Manager." She moved with the brisk, self-important stride of someone who navigates her day from one manufactured crisis to the next. "What's the problem here, Peterson?" she asked, completely ignoring David. Her focus was solely on her employee. Manager Wallace Peterson began his voice, taking on a whiny, deferential tone. "This gentleman has a last-minute booking that triggered a system alert. He's being uncooperative when I try to ask standard verification questions." Wallace finally turned her gaze on David. It was a slow, deliberate appraisal, a visual frisking that took in his comfortable clothes, his tired eyes, his calm posture. Her expression was one of profound skepticism. "Sir," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of any warmth, "we have the right to refuse service to anyone, and we take the security of our airline very seriously. Mr. Peterson is simply doing his job." "His job is to check me in," David stated flatly. "Not to run my credit report based on my wardrobe." Wallace's lips tightened into a thin line. "There's no need to be dramatic. We just need to verify that you are the legitimate holder of this ticket, and that the funds used to purchase it are valid. It's a simple fraud prevention measure. It's a simple humiliation tactic," David corrected her. "You have my passport. You have my booking reference. The name matches. The ticket is paid for. If your payment processing system has cleared the transaction, then that's the end of it." What more could you possibly need to verify? Wallace exchanged a look with Peterson. It was a silent, conspiratorial communication. They were a team, and David was the problem to be managed. "Given the circumstances," Wallace said, her tone hardening, "and your aggressive posture, we're going to need a little more assurance. I'm going to need you to open your duffel bag for a manual inspection right here." This was a gross overstep of protocol. Baggage inspection was the domain of the TSA, not the check-in desk. It was a power play designed to embarrass him into submission in front of a growing crowd of onlookers. David didn't move. He didn't blink. "No." Wallace looked taken aback. She clearly wasn't used to being refused. "Excuse me." "You heard me. You are not TSA. You have no authority to search my personal belongings. You will check my bag, give me my boarding pass, or you will deny me boarding. Make a choice." He had drawn a line in the sand. Wallace, incensed by his defiance, took a step closer. Her voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "All right then. Let's try a different approach. You want to prove this ticket is yours? Show me the bank account you used to purchase it. Right now. Open your mobile banking app and show me the transaction. Show me you have the kind of funds for this ticket." The demand was so outrageously inappropriate, so deeply offensive, that a collective gasp went through the people standing nearby. They were asking him to display his private financial information in the middle of a crowded airport terminal, to justify his existence in a first-class line. This was the moment, the breaking point. David felt a strange calm settle over him. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea the game they were playing was already over, and they had lost before it even began. The air around the Global Wings counter was thick with a toxic silence. Brenda Wallace's demand hung there, a monument to corporate overreach and personal prejudice. She and Peterson stood with their arms crossed, a united front of misplaced authority, their faces smug with the certainty that they had finally cornered him. They expected him to argue, to protest, perhaps to storm off in a rage. They expected a scene that would validate their judgment of him. David Henderson did none of those things. Instead, he slowly, deliberately reached into the pocket of his joggers and retrieved his phone. For a fleeting second, a look of triumph flashed in Wallace's eyes. She thought he was complying. He unlocked the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He didn't open a banking app. He opened his contacts list. He scrolled to a single entry marked SC and pressed the call button. He put the phone to his ear, his gaze never leaving Wallace's. "Sam," he said into the phone, his voice as calm as a frozen lake. "It's me." He listened for a moment, his expression unreadable. The crowd watched, captivated by this new turn in the silent drama. "I'm at JFK, Terminal 4, Concourse B, the Global Wings priority desk." He paused again, a surgeon making a precise incision. "Yes, it's happening. Exactly as we anticipated." The word anticipated was a quiet bombshell. It suggested foreknowledge, a plan. This wasn't a random encounter. It was a test case. Wallace and Peterson exchanged a confused glance. The confidence on their faces began to falter, replaced by a nascent flicker of unease. "Initiate the Phoenix Protocol," David said, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its authority. "Full cascade. Yes, immediately. And Sam, patch in Mr. Galloway. I want him on a conference line in 5 minutes." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He then leaned forward, his hands flat on the counter, and looked at the 2 employees who had so confidently set out to humiliate him. "You have 5 minutes," David said softly, "to provide me with my boarding pass and check my bag. After that, this conversation will be of a very different nature." The mention of a name, Galloway, and the strange, formal command had shifted the dynamic. Robert Galloway was the CEO of Global Wings Airlines. Why would this man be invoking his name? Was it a bluff? A desperate, pathetic attempt by a cornered man to sound important? Wallace chose to believe it was a bluff. Her confidence, shaken for a moment, returned with a vengeance. Arrogance was a hard habit to break. "Threats aren't going to work on me, sir," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "I don't know who you think you are calling for our CEO, but right now you're a potential security risk, and unless you want to be having this conversation with Port Authority police, I suggest you change your attitude." She gestured to a nearby airport security officer who began to amble over his hand resting on his belt. The stakes were now impossibly high. But David didn't even glance at the officer. His focus was entirely on Wallace. The clock was ticking in his head. He knew what the Phoenix Protocol entailed. It was a multi-layered corporate maneuver his legal team, led by Samuel Cole, had designed in the final stages of the acquisition. It was a contingency plan for this exact scenario. A scenario David knew from a lifetime of experience was not a matter of if, but when. The protocol was a digital sledgehammer. The first wave was a series of encrypted emails and secure messages simultaneously dispatched to the entire board of directors of Global Wings, the head of their legal department, the chief of operations, and the head of investor relations. The messages contained a simple, terrifying subject line. Code Phoenix. Urgent action required. JFK T4. The body of the message would be brief, detailing an active high-level corporate incident involving the new majority stakeholder at a specific location and instructing all recipients to await instructions on a secure channel. The second wave, which Sam would trigger 60 seconds after the first, was a direct call to Robert Galloway's personal cell phone. A call the outgoing CEO had been instructed to answer at any time, day or night, during the transition period. David knew that somewhere in a high-rise office in Chicago or on a golf course in Connecticut, a series of phones were beginning to vibrate and ring with an urgency that would send a jolt of pure panic through the highest echelons of Global Wings management. The security officer arrived at the counter. "Is there a problem here, folks?" Wallace turned to him, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Yes, officer. This man is refusing to comply with airline security procedures and is causing a disturbance. I believe he needs to be removed." The officer looked at David, his expression neutral but firm. "Sir, you heard the manager. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." David held up a hand, not in a gesture of defiance, but of pause. "Just one moment, officer. A phone call is about to be made that will clarify this entire situation for everyone." As if on cue, a phone began to ring. It wasn't David's. It was the desk phone at Wallace's managerial podium a few feet away. It was a direct line, one rarely used. It chirped with an insistent, piercing tone. Wallace shot it an irritated glance. "Peterson, get that." Peterson scurried over to answer it. "Brenda Wallace's desk." He listened, his face slowly losing all its color. His eyes widened, and he began to tremble slightly. He held the receiver out to Wallace, his hand shaking. "Brenda," he stammered. It's the director of airport operations. For you." He sounds frantic. Wallace snatched the phone from him, her annoyance clear. "Wallace here." Her face went through a rapid, shocking transformation as she listened. The smug certainty drained away, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, and finally the dawning horror of a person realizing they have just made a catastrophic, career-ending mistake. Her eyes darted over to David, who stood waiting. His expression unchanged. "Yes, Director," she said, her voice suddenly small and strained. "Yes, I understand. No, he's right here. Yes, I'll wait." She hung up the phone, her hand lingering on the receiver, as if it had burned her. "The director is coming down here," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. He said not to do anything, not to let you leave." The power dynamic had just been fractured. The hunter had suddenly realized she might be the prey, and David Henderson hadn't even raised his voice. 30 floors above the streets of Chicago, in the sterile, glass-walled executive suite of Global Wings Tower, Robert Galloway was admiring the view. He was 63 years old, 2 months from a golden parachute retirement, and in the final stages of handing over the company he had run for a decade. The sale to Phoenix Equity Partners had been a bruising, humbling affair. He'd been outmaneuvered at every turn by their enigmatic founder, a man named David Henderson, whom he had met only twice in strained formal meetings. Galloway saw him as a ruthless asset stripper, a new money shark who didn't understand the soul of the airline industry. His personal cell phone, a dedicated line for emergencies, began to vibrate on his polished mahogany desk. The caller ID read, S. Cole. Samuel Cole was Henderson's chief legal counsel, a man with a reputation as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass. Galloway felt a spike of irritation. He was done with these people. The deal was closed. He let it ring for a moment before answering with a sigh. Galloway. Robert Samuel Cole's voice was unnervingly calm, but it had an undercurrent of steel. We have a Code Phoenix situation. Galloway sat bolt upright in his leather chair. Code Phoenix was the term they had agreed upon for any Level 1 incident involving the new ownership during the sensitive transition phase. It was a corporate doomsday button. What's happened? Galloway stammered, his mind racing through catastrophic scenarios. A plane crash, a terror threat, a massive data breach. JFK. Terminal 4. The incident is active and involves Mr. Henderson personally. Galloway's blood ran cold. What do you mean, personally? Is he hurt? Is he safe? He is physically unharmed, Cole replied, the clinical precision of his words offering no comfort. But he is being detained at a check-in counter by your station manager, a Miss Brenda Wallace, and an agent named Peterson. They have accused him of fraud, attempted to illegally search his belongings, and demanded to see his personal bank records. They are currently threatening to have him arrested. There was a moment of pure, uncomprehending silence on Galloway's end. He couldn't process the information. It was too absurd, too surreal. The new owner of his company, a multi-billionaire, was being treated like a common criminal by his own frontline staff. That's impossible, Galloway finally managed to say. I assure you, it is very possible. In fact, Mr. Henderson anticipated this exact contingency, Cole said coolly. He is on the line with us now. David. I'm here. Sam. David Henderson's voice came through the conference line, as placid as if he were commenting on the weather. Hello, Robert. Galloway felt a wave of nausea. He was listening to a live feed of his own company's implosion. David. Mr. Henderson, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. This is an unacceptable outrage. Save the apologies. Robert David's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. What I require right now is a solution. Your people are about to have me removed by Port Authority police. You have 60 seconds to prevent that from happening. I suggest you call your Director of Operations at JFK. His name is Michael Corrigan. Tell him to get to Concourse B immediately. Tell him to stop his staff from making the biggest mistake of their lives. Do you understand? Yes, of course. Galloway fumbled for his desk phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely punch in the numbers for his assistant. Get me Michael Corrigan at JFK. Now. It's a Code 1 emergency. While his assistant scrambled to connect the call, Galloway listened, horrified, as Cole continued on the conference line. Robert, are you still there? Cole asked. Yes, I'm here. Good. For your information, the Phoenix Protocol also includes the automatic drafting of a press release detailing this incident as a case study in systemic customer service failure and racial profiling under your leadership. It cites specific employee conduct regulations that have been violated. That press release is currently awaiting a single keystroke from me to be distributed to every major news outlet in the country. Mr. Henderson will decide whether or not I press that key based on what happens in the next 10 minutes. Galloway felt the floor drop out from beneath him. This wasn't just about appeasing an angry VIP. This was about the complete and utter destruction of his legacy. They would crucify him. The story was too perfect. The clueless, out-of-touch CEO whose bigoted employees harassed the quiet black man who had just bought their company. It was a corporate nightmare made flesh. Finally, his assistant's voice broke through. "Mr. Corrigan is on line 2, sir." Galloway jabbed the button. "Michael, this is Robert Galloway. Drop whatever you are doing right now and run. Do not walk to the Global Wings priority desk in Terminal 4B. There is a passenger there, a black man in a grey hoodie named David Henderson. He is being harassed by Brenda Wallace and one of her agents. You are to de-escalate the situation immediately. Give that man anything he wants. Apologize to him on behalf of the entire company. Do not let your people lay another hand on him or say another word to him. Michael, listen to me very carefully. That man is our new boss. He owns us. Now go." Galloway slammed the phone down, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was breathing heavily, his tailored suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. On the other line, he could hear the faint ambient sounds of the airport terminal. David Henderson had said nothing more. He was just waiting. The quiet man was waiting for the tremors he had started at the top of the mountain to become an earthquake at its base. Michael Corrigan was a man who prided himself on unflappability. As the director of airport operations for JFK, one of the world's busiest hubs, he had seen it all: bomb threats, emergency landings, celebrity meltdowns, and diplomatic incidents. But the call he had just received from CEO Robert Galloway had injected a kind of ice-water terror into his veins he hadn't felt in his 25-year career. That man is our new boss. He owns us. The words echoed in his head as he sprinted through the corridors of Terminal 4, his suit jacket flapping behind him. He dodged slow-moving tourists and frantic travelers, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and dread. He knew Brenda Wallace. She was a rigid, by-the-book manager, but also someone known for a certain inflexibility, a tendency to see problems in black and white, often literally. What in God's name had she done? As he rounded the corner into Concourse B, he saw the scene from a distance. A small crowd had gathered. He could see the blue uniforms of 2 Port Authority officers. He saw Brenda and an agent he recognized as Peterson standing at the counter. And in the middle of it all was a man. A black man, dressed in simple, comfortable clothing, standing with a stillness that was more unnerving than any outburst would have been. Corrigan slowed his pace as he approached, trying to regain his breath and project an aura of calm authority. His eyes met Brenda's. He saw her panicked expression and knew instantly that the situation was as bad as Galloway had described, or worse. Wallace. "What is going on here?" Corrigan said, his voice a low, urgent command. He purposefully positioned himself between the officers and David Henderson, creating a protective barrier. Director Corrigan Wallace began, her voice shaky. This passenger was uncooperative. His booking showed several red flags, and he refused standard verification procedures. Corrigan held up a hand, cutting her off sharply. "Stop. Just stop." He then turned to the Port Authority officers. "Gentlemen, thank you for your response. There has been a significant misunderstanding. This is an internal Global Wings matter. Your services are no longer required." The officers looked from Corrigan to Wallace and then to David. Sensing the shift in authority, they gave a slight nod. "All right. Let us know if you need us." They took a few steps back, effectively disengaging from the confrontation. With the immediate threat of arrest neutralized, Corrigan turned his full attention to the man at the center of the storm. He approached David Henderson cautiously, as one might approach a sleeping lion. He saw the intelligence in the man's eyes, the profound and weary calm that spoke of immense self-control. "Mr. Henderson," Corrigan asked, his voice full of a respect that had been so glaringly absent minutes before. "I am Michael Corrigan, Director of JFK Operations for Global Wings. On behalf of the entire airline, and from the very bottom of my heart, I want to offer you our most profound and sincere apology for this unacceptable ordeal." David didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at Corrigan, his gaze searching. He was assessing him, judging whether the apology was genuine or just the panicked damage control of a corporate lieutenant. Behind Corrigan, Brenda Wallace and Peterson watched, their faces pale masks of utter disbelief. This level of deference, this groveling apology from their boss's boss to the man they had been trying to eject, was inconceivable. The world had turned upside down. "Mr. Corrigan," David finally said, his voice quiet but carrying across the now hushed area. "Your apology is noted. But the problem isn't with you. It's with a culture that allows an employee to believe it's acceptable to demand a passenger display his bank account to prove he belongs in a first-class line." He gestured with his head toward Wallace and Peterson, who both flinched as if struck. "They called this procedure," David continued. "They called it security. But it had nothing to do with either of those things. It was about judgment. It was about prejudice. And that is a disease that is rotting this airline from the inside out. A disease I am now here to cure." It was then that Wallace's phone, which she was still clutching in a white-knuckled grip, began to buzz. The screen lit up with an incoming call. The name displayed made her blood freeze. "Robert Galloway, CEO." She looked at Corrigan with wide, terrified eyes. He gave her a short, sharp nod. "Answer it." With a trembling hand, she swiped to accept the call and put it on speaker, as instructed. "Brenda Wallace," she squeaked. "Ms. Wallace," the voice of the CEO. Thin and strained, crackled through the small speaker. "You are on speakerphone. Mr. Henderson is here, as is Director Corrigan. I want you to listen to me very, very carefully." A hush fell over the small crowd. They were now privy to something far beyond a simple customer service dispute. This was a corporate execution broadcast live on the terminal floor. "The man you have been detaining for the last 30 minutes is David Henderson." "Galloway," said his voice, heavy with dread. "Mr. Henderson is the founder and principal of Phoenix Equity Partners, the firm that as of 9:00 this morning completed its controlling acquisition of this airline." Galloway paused to let the words sink in. Peterson looked like he was going to be physically sick. Brenda Wallace's face had gone from pale to a ghastly, bloodless white. She stared at David, her mind collapsing under the weight of the revelation. The quiet man in the hoodie. The man she had condescended to, threatened, and tried to have arrested. Galloway's voice returned a death knell for 2 careers. "So to be perfectly unequivocally clear, Ms. Wallace, you haven't just been harassing a customer, you've been harassing your new owner." The silence that followed Robert Galloway's announcement was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the air and sound out of the immediate vicinity. The distant rumble of a jet engine, the squeak of suitcase wheels, the murmur of the crowd, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. In the epicenter of that silence stood Brenda Wallace and Mr. Peterson, 2 statues carved from pure, unadulterated horror. Peterson's jaw hung slightly agape. He stared at David Henderson, as if seeing him for the first time, trying to reconcile the image of the man in the simple grey hoodie with the impossible reality of him being the ultimate authority over his entire existence. The power to sign his paycheck, to determine his future, to erase his career, was vested in the very person he had sought to humiliate. Wallace was a different picture. The blood had drained from her face, but her eyes were wide with a frantic, desperate energy. Her mind was scrambling, trying to find a foothold, a way out, an explanation that could somehow mitigate the cataclysm she had unleashed upon herself. It was the frantic calculation of a chess player who has just realized they fell for a trap 10 moves ago and are now facing an unstoppable checkmate. David Henderson watched them, his expression unchanged. He felt no glee, no triumphant surge of "I told you so." There was only a profound, hollow sadness. This wasn't a victory. It was a diagnosis of a sickness he had just paid billions to inherit. He broke the silence. He nodded toward Wallace's still active phone. "Thank you, Robert. That's all for now." The line disconnected, severing the last link to the old power structure. There was only the new one standing right in front of them. Michael Corrigan, the operations director, was the first to recover. He took a half-step forward, his hands slightly raised in a gesture of placation. "Mr. Henderson." "David, whatever you need." "A private lounge." "We can arrange for you to pre-board. I will personally handle your luggage. Just tell me what you want." David's gaze shifted to Corrigan. It was a cold, appraising look. "What I want, Michael, is for you to be a witness." He then turned his attention back to Wallace and Peterson. He spoke not with the anger of a wronged customer, but with the dispassionate precision of a CEO addressing a catastrophic systems failure. "You two have just provided me with more valuable, real-world data in 30 minutes than I received from 6 months of due diligence and 1,000 pages of market research." He began, his voice calm and measured, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had been screaming. "You are the living embodiment of this company's biggest liability, a culture that mistakes arrogance for authority and prejudice for procedure." He took a step closer to the counter, the barrier that Peterson had used to project his power. "You see, I could fire you," he said, looking directly at Peterson, whose eyes were now glistening with tears of panic. "I could call security, the real security, and have you escorted from the premises. Your access cards would be deactivated before you reached the employee parking lot. That would be easy. It would be satisfying for a moment." He paused, letting the thought hang in the air. "But firing you is a termination, an end. And I'm not interested in endings today. I'm interested in beginnings." He shifted his gaze to Wallace, who was trembling, her rigid posture finally crumbling. "Ms. Wallace, you spoke of procedure. So let's talk about a new one. As of this moment, I am announcing a full top-to-bottom audit of all customer-facing protocols within Global Wings. We will create a new passenger Bill of Rights to be displayed at every check-in counter and gate worldwide. It will outline in explicit detail what a passenger can expect from us and what our employees are and are not authorized to do." He looked back and forth between the two of them, ensuring they understood every single word. "Furthermore, I am commissioning an independent investigation into all customer complaints filed over the last 3 years related to discrimination, racial profiling, and abuse of authority. Every single one will be re-examined. That investigation will be headed by Samuel Cole's law firm, and its findings will be made public." This was the true anatomy of karma. It wasn't a simple firing. It was a systemic dismantling of the world they had thrived in. He wasn't just getting rid of 2 bad employees. He was salting the earth of the culture that created them. Your 2 names, David said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, will be the preface to that report. Your actions today will be the case study, the Exhibit A that launches a complete corporate restructuring of our customer service philosophy. You won't just be fired. You will be the reason the entire system is burned to the ground and rebuilt. He finally looked at Corrigan. Michael, effective immediately. Ms. Wallace and Mr. Peterson are suspended pending the outcome of that investigation. I want them relieved of their duties and escorted from the terminal. Not by police, but by human resources. I want this done quietly and professionally. That is a courtesy, he added, looking back at them that they did not afford to me. Corrigan nodded, already pulling out his phone to call HR. Yes, Mr. Henderson. Right away. Peterson finally broke. A choked sob escaped his lips. Please, sir, I have a family. I made a mistake. David looked at him not with anger, but with a cold pity. We all have families. The family you insulted today was the family of Global Wings customers who rely on us for respect and dignity. And you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You made a series of choices. You judged a person based on the color of his skin and the clothes on his back. You abused your authority to escalate the situation. You lied about procedure to justify your prejudice. These were not mistakes. They were decisions. And now you will live with the consequences of those decisions. He picked up his duffel bag from the scale. He turned to Michael Corrigan. Now David Henderson said, his voice returning to a normal conversational tone. I believe I have a flight to catch. Please check my bag. As 2 shell-shocked human resources representatives discreetly led a sobbing Mr. Peterson and a catatonic Brenda Wallace away from the counter, a profound and awkward quiet settled over the scene. The onlookers, who had been treated to a drama far more compelling than any in-flight movie, began to disperse, whispering amongst themselves, their phones likely already buzzing with texts and social media posts about what they had just witnessed. The legend of the quiet man in the hoodie was already being born. Michael Corrigan, flustered, but desperate to please personally, took David's duffel bag and tagged it with a priority sticker, handling it as if it were a priceless artifact. He typed furiously at Peterson's abandoned terminal, his hands moving with a speed born of pure adrenaline. Mr. Henderson, you're all set, he said, holding out a freshly printed paper boarding pass. Seat 1A. I've already spoken to the gate crew and the flight crew. They are aware of your identity and are prepared to welcome you on board. The captain sends his personal regards. David took the boarding pass. The simple piece of paper felt incredibly heavy. It was the prize from a battle he never wanted to fight, but one he was destined for his entire life. He turned not to the security line, but to the queue of passengers who had been delayed by the entire ordeal. He addressed the man in the suit who had been directly behind him. Sir David said, his voice projecting a calm authority that captivated everyone who remained. I want to apologize to you and to everyone else in this line. Your travel was disrupted because of a failure within my organization. That is unacceptable. The man in the suit, a middle-aged executive, looked stunned to be addressed directly. It's all right. No, it's not, David insisted. But I promise you it will be. As of today, Global Wings is under new management. We are going to rebuild this airline on a foundation of respect. We will be the carrier that doesn't just get you to your destination on time, but one that values your dignity every step of the way. For your patience today, everyone who was in this queue will have 50,000 frequent flyer miles deposited into their accounts. Mr. Corrigan will take your names. A wave of shock, followed by murmurs of approval, went through the small group. Corrigan nodded vigorously, already signaling for another agent to come over with a tablet to start taking down information. It was a brilliant move, not just a gesture of goodwill, but a public declaration of a new era, transforming a PR disaster into a powerful branding moment. With a final nod, David turned and walked toward the security checkpoint. He didn't look back. The mess he left behind was no longer his to clean up. His focus was already shifting from the symptom to the cure. As he cleared security and made his way to the gate, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sam Cole. "Galloway is in full meltdown. Board is convening an emergency session. The press release is still on my screen. Your call, boss." David paused by a large window overlooking the tarmac, watching the ground crew service the very plane he was about to board. He saw the Global Wings logo on the tail fin, a stylized, soaring bird that was meant to represent freedom and grace, but had become a symbol of corporate decay. His airline. He typed back a reply. "Hold the press release. The story will get out organically. I prefer it that way." Let Galloway sweat. His incompetence created the conditions for this. "I want his entire executive team's resignation on my desk by the time I land in LA. We're cleaning house, Sam. Top to bottom." He continued to the gate, where the agent who had clearly been briefed greeted him with a level of nervous reverence usually reserved for royalty. "Welcome, Mr. Henderson. We're ready to begin boarding whenever you are." "Board with everyone else," David said. "No special treatment." He took a seat in the waiting area, just another passenger, but he wasn't. He was a force of nature that had just swept through this terminal. The ripples of his actions were already spreading. In Chicago, Robert Galloway was frantically trying to salvage his severance package. In the JFK break rooms, the story of what happened to Brenda Wallace and Peterson was spreading like wildfire, causing every employee to reevaluate their every interaction. On the phones of a dozen passengers, a story was being crafted that would soon go viral, a modern-day fable of corporate karma. And in David Henderson's mind, plans were already forming. He wasn't just thinking about new training modules or customer service scripts. He was thinking bigger. He envisioned a corporate culture where employees were promoted based on empathy, not just efficiency. A blind audition-style hiring process for customer-facing roles to eliminate unconscious bias. A system where passengers could instantly flag an interaction for review by a dedicated ethics team. The incident hadn't just been an obstacle, it had been a clarification. It had distilled his mission down to its purest essence. He hadn't bought an airline simply to make it more profitable. He had bought it to make it better, to make it decent. He was waging a war not just for market share, but for the soul of his company. When boarding was called, he joined the line with everyone else, his boarding pass in hand. He walked down the jet bridge, the quiet man in the hoodie, his mind already 5,000 miles and 3 years down the road, building his new empire not on steel and stock prices, but on a single, simple and revolutionary idea: respect. The first-class cabin of the Airbus A3221 was a sanctuary of hushed tones and muted luxury. The flight attendant, a woman named Jennifer, whose smile was wide but tinged with an obvious nervousness, personally showed David to his seat 1A. It was a lie-flat pod, a cocoon of privacy and comfort. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice a little breathless. Can I get you something to drink before we take off? Champagne? Anything at all on the house, of course. David looked up at her and offered a small, tired smile. Water would be great, Jennifer. Thank you. And please relax. You're doing a great job. The simple act of using her name and offering reassurance seemed to visibly calm her. She nodded gratefully and hurried off to the galley. He settled into the plush leather, the seat molding around him. He finally let out a long, slow breath, the tension of the last few hours beginning to seep out of his muscles. He wasn't a force of nature anymore. He wasn't a CEO or a corporate raider. He was just a man in a seat, tired and ready to go home. He looked out the small oval window. The ground crew was pulling away the jet bridge. The baggage carts were making their final runs. He thought about his own duffel bag now somewhere in the belly of the plane. He thought about Brenda Wallace and Mr. Peterson, now somewhere in a sterile HR office, their lives irrevocably altered. He felt no satisfaction in their ruin. What he felt was a profound sense of responsibility. The power he had wielded today was immense, terrifying in its scope. The ability to shatter careers with a single phone call was not something to be celebrated. It was a burden. He knew that for every Brenda Wallace who was openly hostile, there were 100 others whose prejudice was quieter, more insidious, buried deep within the corporate culture. Firing 2 people wouldn't fix that. It was like pulling 2 weeds and ignoring the poisoned soil they grew in. The plane began its slow pushback from the gate. David pulled a sleek silver tablet from his carry-on. He didn't queue up a movie or look at stock prices. He opened a file labeled Project Phoenix Day 1. It was a blueprint he and Sam Cole had been working on for months, a radical restructuring plan for Global Wings. He scrolled past the financial projections and logistical overhauls until he reached the section titled Corporate Culture and Human Capital. He began to type his fingers, flying across the screen. Item 1. Immediate implementation of a company-wide third-party-led unconscious bias and de-escalation training program, mandatory for all employees from the boardroom to the baggage handlers. Certification will be required for promotion. Item 2. Establish a new independent office of passenger advocacy. This office will report directly to my office, not to operations or legal. Its sole purpose is to investigate customer complaints with the power to recommend disciplinary action, including termination. Item 3. Revamp the employee bonus structure. Tie a significant portion of all managerial bonuses not just to on-time performance and profitability, but to quantifiable metrics of customer satisfaction and positive employee conduct reviews. Reward empathy as much as efficiency. Item 4. Launch the Global Wings Grant Program. A multi-million-dollar fund dedicated to providing scholarships and career opportunities in aviation for individuals from underserved communities. We don't just find the best talent, we create it. He kept typing his mind alive with ideas. The anger and frustration from the check-in counter had been transmuted into a cold, hard resolve. This was how he would fight. Not with shouting or anger, but with policy, with structure, with a relentless, systematic effort to build a company that was worthy of the people it served and the people who worked for it. The plane taxied onto the runway, its engines whining as they spooled up to full power. Jennifer returned with his water, placing it silently on the console beside him. As the aircraft hurtled down the runway and lifted gracefully into the sky, David looked down at the sprawling map of New York City, shrinking below. He saw the lights of the 5 boroughs, a tapestry of millions of lives, millions of stories. He had been just one of those stories today, a tiny anonymous data point, until he chose not to be. He had bought an airline to own a business. But as he soared at 30,000 feet, looking out from his throne in the sky, he realized his mission was far greater. He hadn't just bought a fleet of planes and a collection of routes. He had bought a platform. He had bought a chance to prove that a corporation could have a conscience. That power could be used to build, not just to break. The real work, the hard work, had just begun. David Henderson's journey didn't end when he landed in Los Angeles. In fact, it was just the beginning. The story of what happened at JFK became a catalyst for one of the most radical corporate turnarounds in aviation history. He didn't just fire 2 employees. He rebuilt the entire culture of global wings, proving that true power isn't about revenge, but about reformation. His story serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who is about to change the world. And that karma, when it finally arrives, can be as meticulous and systematic as a corporate takeover. If you were moved by David's incredible story and believe in the power of quiet strength to overcome loud injustice, then please help us share it. Hit that like button to let us know it resonated with you, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more unforgettable tales of karma, justice, and the hidden dramas of real life. What would you have done in David's position? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one.